She was a glorified clerk in Georgia. She never saw a cent of combat pay. That's what my brother Craig shouted in a county courtroom 6 inches from my face, while our father sat 3 rows back and nodded along like a man watching a sermon he'd already memorized. I didn't flinch. I stayed silent, my hands folded in my lap. The court reporter's monitor cast a pale blue glow across the table in front of me, and the only sound after Craig's voice stopped bouncing off the oak panels was the metallic click of his cheap cufflinks as he adjusted his sleeves. Proud of himself. $74,300. That's what they took. That's what brought me here. But this story doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with a lesson I learned too late. I learned the hard way that in my family, my silence was never seen as strength, only proof that I didn't matter. The night Craig called me a glorified clerk in front of a judge, a bailiff, and 14 members of my extended family, something inside me shifted like a bone that never set right. Growing up in the Langford household meant earning affection like rent. Craig was the firstborn. Craig was the builder. Craig shook hands with men twice his age at our father's hardware store when he was 12. He played varsity football, drove a truck by 16, and told everyone within earshot that he'd built Langford Logistics, LLC from nothing but grit and gasoline. That was the story. That was the only story. I was the other one. The intense child, too curious, too quiet, too precise. I lined up my books by height. I labeled my drawers. I once reorganized our father's entire stockroom at 13 because the inventory system he used was a spiral notebook and a pencil stub. Warren looked at the result, nodded once, and said, "Don't touch my things again." I stopped trying. When I left for the University of Virginia at 18, no one drove me. I took a Greyhound with a duffel bag and a letter of acceptance to the ROTC program folded into my jacket pocket. 4 years later, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. I called home that afternoon. Warren picked up on the fifth ring. "That's nice, Phoebe. Craig just signed a lease on a new warehouse, 12,000 square feet." That was it. No congratulations, no warmth, just a redirect to the son who mattered. I didn't come home for Christmas that year, or the next. By 2016, I had made captain. I was 28, and I had been reassigned to something I could never explain at a dinner table: classified theater sustainment. The words meant nothing to civilians, and that was by design. I didn't move boxes. I moved sensitive assets into high-threat environments: Djibouti, Jordan, Poland. I built corridors that didn't exist on any public map. I routed supply chains through checkpoints that had no names into facilities that had no addresses. The sand in the Horn of Africa tasted like copper and chalk. The fluorescent lights in the operations center hummed at a frequency that settled into your teeth. The blue glow of encrypted monitors became the only sunrise I knew for months at a time. But when anyone asked, family, old classmates, strangers at gas stations during my rare stateside rotations, I gave them the same 7 words: "I work in supply chain consulting." Some clients preferred discretion. That was the cover: clean, simple, ordinary enough to bore anyone into changing the subject, and it worked. It worked so well that my own family believed I was nobody. Warren told the extended family I was just doing office work down in D.C. He said it at Thanksgiving. He said it at Craig's birthday. He said it to Sarah Davis, the family friend who'd known me since I was 9, and Sarah repeated it back to me once with a pitying smile and a pat on the arm. "At least you're safe, honey. Not everyone's cut out for the hard stuff." They hadn't just forgotten me, they'd rewritten me. Craig was worse. Craig needed me small. His trucking company had been bleeding money since 2019, and by 2021, the bleeding had turned arterial. He needed someone beneath him to feel tall, and I was the designated foundation. At every family gathering I managed to attend, which grew fewer each year, he performed the same routine. "Phoebe handles paperwork," he'd say, adjusting that same cheap watch he'd worn since high school. "She sits in an air-conditioned office somewhere in Savannah and pushes papers around, nothing dangerous, nothing hard." He'd pause. He'd look around the room to make sure everyone was listening. Not like running a real business, not like keeping 16 trucks on the road and 30 men employed. And the room would nod. Warren would nod. Sarah Davis would nod. And I would sit in whatever lesser chair they'd assigned me, fold my napkin beside my untouched plate, and say nothing. They thought silence meant agreement. They thought my calm was confirmation. They don't know that yet. What none of them knew, what I never explained because I was never permitted to explain, was that during those years of office work, I had designed the primary sustainment corridor for 3 joint operations across 2 continents. I held active clearance above the level of most colonels. My code designation was Foxtrot Lima 9, and every single month for 96 consecutive months, a military pay allotment, verified, serialized, and co-signed by Warren Langford himself, was deposited into a joint safeguard account that my father had promised to protect. 96 deposits, 8 years. $74,300. And then, 6 months ago, I logged into the account from a secure terminal in a facility I cannot name, in a country I will never disclose. The balance read 0. Not low, not reduced, 0. The thing about silence is that it isn't always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. I didn't call Craig. I didn't call Warren. I called my JAG liaison. Within 72 hours, a forensic accountant had traced every withdrawal, every single one routed to the same destination. Langford Logistics, LLC, Craig's company, his failing, hemorrhaging, desperate company, and every withdrawal bore the same authorization, Warren's signature, the same signature that sat beside mine on the original account documents, the same signature he would later claim, under oath, he had no memory of. Denial, I would learn, was their specialty. The civil restitution hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon floor polish. The oak paneling along the walls had darkened with decades of quiet proceedings, and the overhead lights buzzed with the kind of low electrical hum that reminded me of every operations center I'd ever worked in. Except here, the stakes were supposed to be smaller. Here, the uniforms were suits and ties instead of combat fatigues. Here, the enemy was family. I arrived early. I wore a charcoal blazer, sleeves to the elbow. My hair was pulled back, no jewelry except for one item, a thin, matte black pin on my lapel, small, understated, featuring a redacted serial number visible only if you knew to look. Most people glanced past it like a piece of costume jewelry. It was not costume jewelry. Craig arrived 12 minutes late, flanked by Warren and 2 cousins I hadn't seen in 4 years. He wore a navy suit that didn't fit right in the shoulders and those same cufflinks, silver-toned, loud against his wrists every time he moved his hands. He walked past my table without looking at me. Warren followed. He didn't look either. Sarah Davis sat in the gallery, 3rd row, hands clasped in her lap like she was attending a funeral she hadn't been warned about. The proceedings began quietly. My counsel laid out the documentation. 96 deposit records, account co-signature verification, forensic withdrawal analysis tracing every dollar to Craig's LLC. The numbers were clean. The numbers were unarguable. The judge reviewed the filings with the expression of a woman who had seen this particular species of family betrayal before. Then Warren took the stand. He sat down slowly. He placed his hands on the rail. He looked at the judge with the same expression he used when a customer at the hardware store questioned a price. Patient, vaguely offended, completely certain of his own honesty. I have no knowledge of military pay systems, he said. His voice was steady, rehearsed. Phoebe may have been confused about the nature of the account. I don't recall signing anything related to allotments. I thought it was a personal savings account she'd set up on her own. He paused. She was doing office work, consulting. I don't believe she was ever deployed in any meaningful capacity. I folded my hands. I watched. The blue glow of the court reporter's monitor pulsed softly at the edge of my vision. They had crafted this story carefully. Craig stood next. He didn't wait for his attorney to finish the question. He turned toward the gallery, toward Sarah Davis, toward the cousins, toward every familiar face in that room, and he spoke like a man delivering a verdict of his own. She was a glorified clerk in Georgia. She never saw a cent of combat pay because she never saw combat. She was basically a house guest of the Army. She's making up the deployment bit to hide her own bad spending. He pointed at me without looking at me. There is no deployment. There is no classified anything. She pushed papers in an air-conditioned building, and now she wants us to believe she's some kind of soldier. The room shifted. I could feel it. The cousins exchanged glances. Sarah Davis pressed her lips together. Even the bailiff near the door adjusted his posture, leaning slightly forward as if the accusation had changed the gravity in the room. Craig turned to face me directly. You never served, Phoebe. Not really. And everyone in this room knows it. Even the overhead lights seemed to dim, just slightly, as the hum in the ceiling settled into something heavier. I didn't flinch. I stayed silent. My hand stayed folded in my lap, and then Craig looked at the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to file a formal counterclaim. Fraud, stolen credentials, fabricated service records. My sister has been lying about her military career for years to justify hoarding family money. The judge's pen stopped moving. My attorney started to rise. But I placed my hand on his arm. One touch. He sat back down. I adjusted the pin on my collar. What they didn't know yet was that someone in this courthouse had already made a phone call. And in approximately 11 minutes, the heavy double doors at the back of this courtroom were going to open, and everything Craig Langford thought he knew about his sister, about power, about who owned the truth in this family was going to be dismantled with the precision of a classified audit. Not yet. I folded my napkin beside my untouched water glass and waited. Craig was still standing when the judge asked him to sit down. He didn't. He adjusted his cufflinks, that metallic click again, sharp against the oak-paneled quiet, and turned back toward the gallery like a man addressing his congregation. I want every person in this room to understand what's happening here, he said, his voice rising. My sister spent 8 years hiding in some government cubicle, and now she's trying to paint herself as Captain America to shake down her own family. He pulled a manila folder from beneath his suit jacket like a magician, revealing the final trick. He opened it on the railing of the witness box and fanned out 3 printed pages. I did my own research. No combat deployment orders under her name in any public database. No unit citation. No photographs of Phoebe Langford in any theater of operations. No medals. No ceremony. Nothing. He tapped the pages with his index finger. Because there's nothing to find. Warren nodded from the 3rd row. Slow, deliberate, the nod of a man who believed his son had just delivered the killing blow. Sarah Davis shifted in her seat but didn't speak. Her eyes moved between Craig and me, then dropped to her hands. I sat still. My hands hadn't moved from my lap. My breathing hadn't changed. The court reporter's monitor pulsed its pale blue light, and the only motion at my table was the barely perceptible rise and fall of the matte black pin on my lapel, moving with my breath. Craig looked at it. He'd never looked at it before. Not once in all the years I'd worn it to family dinners and courthouses and airports. It had always been invisible to him, a small, dark piece of metal that registered as nothing. Costume jewelry? A lapel decoration from a corporate retreat, the kind of thing a paper pusher might wear to feel important. But today, for some reason, his eyes caught it. "What is that?" he said. Not a question. A dismissal. I didn't answer. Some kind of office award? He was smiling now, playing to the gallery. Employee of the month pin from her consulting firm? A few of the cousins exhaled something close to laughter. Warren's mouth twitched at the corner. Craig reached across the railing toward my lapel. His fingers were 3 inches from the pin when my attorney shifted forward, but I was faster. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I simply turned my shoulder 45 degrees, a movement so controlled it looked like breathing, and Craig's hand closed on air. "It's not decorative, Waikikatsaarden," I said. 5 words. The first I'd spoken since the proceedings began. Craig blinked. "What?" "It's not decorative." The judge looked at me. My attorney looked at me. Craig's hand was still suspended in the air between us, fingers half curled as if he'd reached for something and discovered it was hot. "It's serialized," I said. "Redacted, and it isn't mine to explain." Craig's smile faltered, not because he understood, he didn't, but because something in my voice had shifted the temperature in the room by half a degree. And even a man as loud as Craig Langford could feel cold air when it moved. He recovered quickly. He always did. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, Your Honor." He turned back to the judge, gesturing at me with the folder still in his hand. "She talks like she's in a spy movie. Serialized. Redacted. It's theater. It's always been theater. She's been playing dress up with government jargon for a decade to avoid admitting she sits at a desk and does nothing." The judge raised her hand. "Mr. Langford, please return to your seat." "Your Honor, I'm simply—" "Return to your seat." Craig sat. The folder stayed open on the railing. His cufflinks clicked twice against the armrest of his chair. The courtroom settled into a silence that pressed against the walls. The overhead lights hummed. The bailiff near the door hadn't moved, but his weight had shifted forward onto the balls of his feet, as if the room itself had told him to pay attention. I looked at the back of the courtroom. Not at Craig, not at Warren, not at Sarah Davis or the cousins or the judge. I looked at the heavy double doors. Oak, brass handles closed, not for long. The clock on the courtroom wall read 9:47. Warren's testimony had begun at 9:32. 15 minutes, that was the window. That was always the window. I heard them before anyone else did. 2 sets of footsteps, not the shuffling gait of courthouse staff or the tentative click of civilian dress shoes. These were measured, precise, cadenced, the unmistakable rhythm of polished combat boots striking hardwood in perfect synchronization. The kind of sound that doesn't ask permission to enter a room. The double doors opened, not swung, not burst, opened with the deliberate, unhurried authority of people who understood that speed was unnecessary when rank did the speaking. Colonel Marcus Miller walked in first. He was 6'2", silver at the temples. His Class A uniform carried more ribbons than anyone in that courtroom had likely seen outside of a television broadcast. The overhead lights caught the brass of his insignia, eagle, wings spread, and threw a sliver of gold across the oak paneling as he moved down the center aisle. His jaw was set. His posture was absolute. He didn't scan the room. He didn't acknowledge the gallery. He walked with the trajectory of a man who had already read every document in this case and found exactly one person in this courthouse worth addressing. Behind him, 1 step back and 1 step to the left, walked Lieutenant Scott Walker. Younger, leaner, same precision in his stride, same silence in his bearing. He carried a slim leather folio under his left arm, held flush against his ribs like a weapon he hadn't been ordered to draw yet. The bailiff straightened. The judge's pen stopped. Sarah Davis's hands separated and gripped the edge of the bench in front of her. The cousins went rigid, every one of them, as if the same electrical current had passed through the wooden gallery seating. Craig turned in his chair. His mouth opened, then closed. Warren didn't turn. He didn't need to. The sound of those boots told him everything his body needed to know, and the color left his face in a slow tide, starting at the jaw and moving upward until even his ears were pale. Colonel Miller reached the front of the courtroom. He stopped at my table, not at the judge's bench, not at Craig's position, not at the witness stand. He stopped directly in front of me. Lieutenant Walker halted one pace behind him and pivoted to face the room. And then Colonel Marcus Miller, United States Army Inspector General's office, did something that severed every assumption in that courtroom like a wire clean. He saluted, crisp, formal, textbook. His right hand rose to his brow with the kind of mechanical precision that only comes from 30 years of service and absolute respect for the person standing, or, in my case, sitting before him. Lieutenant Walker saluted one beat after. Same form, same discipline, same direction. They didn't salute the judge. They didn't salute the bailiff. They didn't look at Craig Langford or Warren Langford or any of the 14 family members frozen in the gallery behind them. They saluted me. I rose from my chair. Slowly. My hands left my lap for the first time since the proceedings began. I returned the salute with a stillness that had been trained into my muscle memory across 3 continents and 8 years of service that no one in this room, not one of them, had ever bothered to ask about. Captain Langford. Colonel Miller's voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of a rank that made every other title in this courtroom irrelevant. Ma'am, we're here on behalf of Army Finance Command and the Inspector General's office. The room did not breathe. Craig's folder slid from the railing and hit the floor. He didn't pick it up. His hands were gripping the armrests of his chair, knuckles white, and the metallic click of his cufflinks had gone silent because his wrists had stopped moving entirely. Warren sat in the 3rd row with his mouth slightly open, his lips forming the beginning of a word that never arrived. His hands, the same hands that had signed 96 allotment documents, were trembling against his thighs. Sarah Davis pressed her back flat against the bench. Her eyes were wide. Her head moved between me and the colonel with the slow, mechanical rotation of someone watching a truth they had never been equipped to process. Even the chandelier above the gallery seemed to hold still, its small glass fixtures catching the overhead light and refusing to sway. And suddenly, every person in that courtroom, every cousin, every family friend, every Langford who had spent a decade telling each other that Phoebe was a paper pusher, a clerk, a nobody in an air-conditioned office, went very, very quiet. If you've ever been called a liar by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button and subscribe. Colonel Miller lowered his salute. He turned to face the judge. Your Honor, I'm Colonel Marcus Miller, United States Army. I'm here to enter evidence on behalf of the service members seated at that table. He paused. And to correct a significant number of misrepresentations that have been made under oath in this proceeding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Craig's chair creaked as he leaned back. His face had gone the color of old wax. His mouth opened once, closed, opened again. I didn't, Mr. Langford. Colonel Miller didn't turn to look at him. You'll have your opportunity to speak. I'd recommend you use it more carefully than you have so far. Craig's mouth closed. His hands dropped to his sides. And for the first time in 38 years, my older brother had nothing to say. Colonel Miller nodded to Lieutenant Walker. The lieutenant stepped forward, opened the leather folio, and placed a single document on the judge's bench. Then a second, then a third. Each page was laid down with the care of a man handling ordnance, deliberate, precise, aware of the yield. Your Honor, What I'm entering into evidence is a certified sustainment audit conducted by Army Finance Command in coordination with the Inspector General's office. Colonel Miller's voice never rose above conversational volume. It didn't need to. This audit was initiated 6 months ago when Captain Langford reported a financial anomaly through her JAG liaison. It has since expanded in scope. He clasped his hands behind his back. Captain Phoebe Langford was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 2012 through the University of Virginia ROTC program. She served 8 years of active duty across 3 major operational theaters: the Horn of Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. In 2016, she was promoted to captain and reassigned to classified theater sustainment under Title 10 authority. He paused. Not for effect, for accuracy, Captain Langford was the primary architect of the Eastern European Sustainment Corridor. She designed and managed supply chain infrastructure for joint operations in environments I am not at liberty to name in open proceedings. Her work involved the movement of sensitive assets through high-threat checkpoints into facilities that do not appear on any unclassified map. Her clearance level exceeds that of most field-grade officers. Her code designation was Foxtrot Lima 9. Craig made a sound, not a word. Something lower, something involuntary. The sound a man makes when the floor beneath his chair begins to tilt. Colonel Miller turned to face the gallery for the first time. The pin on Captain Langford's lapel is not a corporate award. It is not a decoration from a consulting firm. It is a serialized Sustainment Excellence Badge issued to logistics officers who manage black site supply chains. The serial number is redacted because the operations it represents remain classified. There are fewer than 40 of these pins in existence. Sarah Davis's hand rose to her mouth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Now, Colonel Miller turned back to the judge. Regarding the financial matter before this court, Lieutenant Walker placed a 4th document on the bench. This one was thicker, bound. Captain Langford routed 96 consecutive monthly pay allotments into a joint safeguard account co-signed by Warren Langford. He didn't look at Warren. He said the name the way you'd read a serial number from a manifest, flat, factual, stripped of sentiment. Each deposit was verified. Each deposit was serialized. Each deposit bears Warren Langford's co-signature 96 times. He let the number sit in the room. A forensic accountant retained by Army Finance Command has traced every withdrawal from that account to a single destination, Langford Logistics, LLC, a commercial trucking company owned and operated by Craig Langford. Now he looked at Craig. The total amount withdrawn is $74,300 to the cent. Craig's hands were in his lap now. His cufflinks had gone silent. His jaw worked once, twice, producing nothing. But the financial theft is not the primary concern of the Inspector General's office. The room shifted. I could feel it. The way a current changes direction underground before the surface knows. Mr. Langford's counterclaim, his accusation of fraud, fabricated service records, and stolen credentials triggered a formal review of Captain Langford's security clearance. That review, in turn, initiated a red flag audit of every operation her clearance touches. Colonel Miller's voice dropped half a register. 3 active sustainment corridors were flagged for potential compromise. 2 classified logistics chains required emergency rerouting. Personnel across 2 theaters were placed on heightened operational security protocols pending the resolution of this audit. He paused. Because a civilian filed a fraudulent counterclaim in a county courthouse, the United States Army was forced to spend 11 days verifying that one of its most effective sustainment officers had not been compromised. The chandelier above the gallery trembled, barely, just enough for the glass fixtures to catch the light and scatter it in a brief fractured arc across the oak paneling. The corridors were not compromised. Captain Langford's record is without blemish. Her clearance has been fully reinstated. Colonel Miller placed his hands flat on the edge of the table. But 11 days of operational disruption, 11 days of uncertainty in 2 active theaters, that is the cost of what happened in this courtroom. Craig leaned forward. His voice cracked on the first syllable. I didn't know. I thought it was just a joint account. I didn't think the Army would actually come looking. Colonel Miller didn't respond to him. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'm also obligated to note that Warren Langford's testimony, specifically his sworn statement that he had no knowledge of military pay systems and did not recall signing allotment documents, is directly contradicted by 96 co-signatures, each bearing his name, each dated, each verified through Army Finance Command records. He straightened. The Inspector General's office is prepared to refer this matter to the State Attorney General for perjury prosecution. Warren stood. His chair scraped against the gallery floor with a sound like a nail being pulled from old wood. His face was gray. Not pale. Gray. The color of a man watching the architecture of his own story collapse from the foundation up. She never told us, he said. His voice shook. She never said what she was doing. How were we supposed to know? I looked at my father. For the first time in the proceedings, I turned in my chair and faced him directly. The blue glow of the court reporter's monitor caught the edge of my pin, and the redacted serial number flickered in the light like a word someone had tried to erase but couldn't. You didn't want the truth, Warren. You wanted a confession. His mouth opened. Nothing came. You didn't ask, I said. Not once. In 12 years. You didn't ask what I did. You didn't ask where I went. You didn't ask why I missed Christmas, or why my phone number changed, or why I couldn't tell you which country I was calling from. I folded my hands on the table. You didn't ask because the answer might have made you uncomfortable. It might have made Craig feel small. And this family was never built to make Craig feel small. Craig's head dropped. Not a dramatic collapse, not a performance, just the slow, gravitational surrender of a man who had run out of noise. I spent 12 years moving mountains so men like you could sleep safe, I said. You shouldn't have touched the mountain's money. The judge called a 15-minute recess. It lasted 40. When the court reconvened, the ruling was swift. Full restitution ordered $74,300 to be recovered through immediate seizure of Langford Logistics LLC assets. Craig's counterclaim was dismissed with prejudice. The judge noted without inflection that filing a fraudulent stolen valor accusation against an active duty officer in her courtroom was an act of breathtaking recklessness. Warren Langford was escorted from the courtroom by 2 bailiffs, not in handcuffs, not yet, but with a perjury referral already drafted and a state attorney general's office that had been notified before Colonel Miller's boots had crossed the threshold. Warren didn't look at me as he passed. He looked at the floor, the same floor his hardware store boots had walked across 1,000 times, the same floor that had never once felt unsteady beneath him until today. Craig sat alone at his table for 11 minutes after the ruling. His attorney had already left. His folder was still on the floor where it had fallen. He picked it up eventually. He held it against his chest like a man clutching something that had already stopped working. He looked at me once, not with anger, not with shame, with a hollow, disoriented stare of someone who had just discovered that the person they'd spent a lifetime measuring themselves against had never been competing at all. I didn't speak to him. I adjusted the pin on my collar, stood and walked out of the courtroom, beside Colonel Miller and Lieutenant Walker. The autumn air outside the courthouse was sharp and clean. The oak trees along the sidewalk had turned the color of old bronze, and the wind moved through them with a sound like pages turning. It's Captain Langford. Colonel Miller stopped at the bottom of the steps. His tone shifted, still military, but a degree warmer. The way a commanding officer speaks when the mission is complete and the personnel are intact. The IG report will be finalized within 30 days. Your clearance reinstatement is already processed. And for what it's worth, he paused. Foxtrot Lima 9 was the cleanest corridor we've ever run in that theater. That's your work. That doesn't go away because your family couldn't see it, I nodded. Thank you, sir. Walker will coordinate with your JAG liaison on the restitution timeline. Understood. He extended his hand. I shook it. Lieutenant Walker saluted. I returned it. Then they walked to a black sedan parked at the curb, and I stood alone on the courthouse steps with the wind pressing against my blazer and the pin on my lapel catching the October light. 3 months later, I was back in the SCIF. Same encrypted monitors, same blue glow, same frequency humming in the overhead lights that settled into your teeth if you sat still long enough. But the work on my screen was different. The Langford Financial Readiness Program, named not for the family that failed me, but for the lesson they taught me. A financial literacy initiative designed for deployed service members, young enlisted soldiers, and junior officers routing their pay through family accounts and joint savings, trusting the people back home to protect what they'd earned in places they could never describe. I built it the same way I built sustainment corridors. Quiet, precise, without ceremony. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was the same instinct that had guided every supply chain I'd ever designed. The knowledge that the people doing the hardest work in the most invisible places deserve someone making sure their foundation holds. Warren's perjury case moved to the state attorney general's office. I didn't follow it. I didn't need to. The audit was final. The numbers didn't lie. People did. Craig's company was dissolved. The assets seized. The warehouse, 12,000 square feet, the one Warren had bragged about on the phone the day I was commissioned, was sold at auction for less than the restitution owed. I heard this from my JAG liaison, not from family. No one called, no one wrote. That was fine. Sarah Davis sent a letter, 1 page, handwritten. She didn't apologize for what she'd believed. She apologized for what she hadn't asked. It wasn't enough. But it was honest. And honesty, I had learned, was rarer than rank. I work in a facility now with no windows and no name on the door. The monitors glow the same shade of blue they always have. The corridors I build still don't appear on any public map. My name doesn't appear on any commendation wall. There is no plaque, no photograph in a family gallery, no mantle display, just Phoebe. Silence had always been the language of my life. They mistook it for weakness. They mistook it for absence. They mistook it for permission. It was none of those things. Silence was the architecture of everything I'd ever built. Every corridor, every supply chain, every quiet act of service that kept the world turning while the loud ones took credit for the sunrise. There is power in patience. There is freedom in truth, even when it comes late. And there is a kind of victory that doesn't announce itself, doesn't raise its voice, doesn't click its cufflinks for the gallery. It just stands, quiet, precise, unmoved. I am no longer missing. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.